Wow, thank you so much, Andy, for all those insider perspectives. That's fabulous. So I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, and that's Dr. Keith Taylor. Dr. Taylor is a Community Economic Development Specialist with the Department of Human Ecology at the University of California, Davis. Prior to joining UC Davis, Dr. Taylor was a research associate at Indiana University's Ostrom Workshop. He's also worked as a legislative aide for a member of Congress, and he's consulted in business strategy and economic and international development and engaged in board development and facilitation around strategic planning. Today, Dr. Taylor will be sharing his insights on the success of the co-op business model. And as Mike mentioned yesterday, ACES has a limited number of Dr. Taylor's books available complimentary from ACES. Dr. Taylor will be heading out to the foyer immediately following his presentation to sign copies of his book, and they'll be available on a first-come, first-served basis. If you'd like a book but aren't able to get one today, please visit the registration desk before the conference concludes to let ACES know that you'd like them to send you one after the conference. And again, ACES will be providing the books complimentary for all attendees. So please welcome Dr. Taylor.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Mike, for inviting me here to come speak for ACES. Thank you all for hosting me here. I'm looking forward to getting this message out. Before I go into the content of this, I want to explain a little bit about my position. I'm a Community Economic Development Specialist, which a lot of you might not know. In California, we label things a little differently. I'm essentially an extension professor. So instead of having a classroom with your everyday students, I go out into California and rural communities all over the United States. I'm sort of a populist academic, so I really enjoy the kind of work that I get to do. So I want to tell you why this research that I'm doing is important to me, but why I also think it's important to the electric cooperative sector. I'll give you a spoiler alert up front. When governed correctly, cooperatives are a fantastic business model. Cooperatives like ACES that are cooperatives of cooperatives do a great deal to empower your local community and also local businesses along the way. So I want to start the presentation by detailing a little problem for the co-op sector. So I do a lot of field work around rural communities, working with economic development policymakers. And what do these local economic development policymakers think about cooperatives? What I often hear up front is cooperatives aren't competitive. Right? So it's a really depressing message that I get from these folks, especially when I'm going around California where we don't have a lot of electric cooperatives. What I think is remarkable is when you look at this slide up here, you see the scale of the cooperative sector. I have a hunch that many of you weren't aware that beyond electric cooperatives, how big the sector was globally. The scope of it's pretty remarkable. But let's look more here at the United States. I find it funny that people say that cooperatives aren't competitive. There's 65,000 cooperatives in the United States, and they do $650 billion in revenue, and that's on the conservative side. Show of hands, who here banks with the credit union? All right. How many of you here go to Ace Hardware for your hardware needs? So to me, this doesn't look like a marginal movement. People use cooperatives in their day-to-day lives, and it's kind of this hidden sector that really has a major impact on what we do in our economy. When I go and I talk to these policymakers, the next comment typically goes something like this. Well, if co-ops are this big, then it must be heavily subsidized. Right? Well, if you all know how we deal with our investor-owned counterparts, we know co-ops don't typically get the same kind of benefits that are available to our investor-owned folks. I use this image here of this professional sports stadium because there's tons of stories about how sports teams get all these subsidies. And this is despite having millionaire players and billionaire owners. They get the subsidies, they're not criticized as much, but somehow cooperatives are subsidized along the way. I find that to be a peculiar argument. And I'm kind of wondering, who here is a billionaire? Anybody? Oh, well, that's weird. It doesn't seem like co-ops produce a lot of billionaires along the way. So I guess there's no government subsidies for you guys. So cooperatives, despite this, are really heavily competitive. So this map here details where all the cooperatives are in the United States, the 65,000 of them. They can achieve enormous economies of scale, which indicates market competitiveness. But do cooperatives get any more slack from our policymakers and people in the public? Typically not. So the next comment that I usually get when I'm dealing with policymakers is something like, there's one bad co-op, so they must all be bad, right? So one bad apple spoils the whole bunch. Well, if that's true, what about these guys? What about the investor-owned firms that are out there? What about their major stories? What about the banks in the 2008 economic crisis? What about Enron? And in California, where I'm at right now, there's this little company called PG&E. They're going through a couple of hiccups here and there. No one's saying we got to get rid of the investor-owned model in electricity. So, by this point, when you're having this conversation with people that are doing economic development or other policymakers, their insecurities start to show. As if to say, how come I didn't get to know about this business model? And you tend to get a knee-jerk comment of, well, competition is the highest ideal, right? Well, what about these firms up here? These are all cooperatives. What about their communities they benefit, and what about the economy that they support? I know the potential of cooperatives to make their communities better and to make our economy fair. So my passion project is you. It's the electric cooperative sector. You're the story of public entrepreneurship, but also economic democracy. And this is something that's not talked about in this time when we have all these political impasses. My identity is also rural America. You are rural America. I love to tell everyone about cooperatives, including my wife. She's enamored with my research. She loves to hear me talk about this. So, what took me down this path? I come from Mattoon, Illinois. I come from a lower middle class family. I know rural decline. I was told when I finished high school, I'd be getting a job in a unionized factory or I'd be working for government. A lot's changed since then. My community's leaders promised us a bright future. They said, we're going to take care of things, we're going to work in economic development. And as long as I could remember, economic development discussions have been embedded in my community's DNA. We were the community that was supposed to get Future Gen, for those of you who recall that. It was going to really stimulate a lot of new job growth in our community, bring in new tax revenue, bring in new businesses. But as the Future Gen story goes, a lot of promises of rural prosperity were broken in my community. Along the way, I got involved in partisan politics. I worked in D.C. as a legislative aide for the Southern Illinois Congressman, David Phelps. I even ran for local office in 2006 as a county clerk. The reason why I ran for county clerk was I was really interested in trying to get folks more involved in participatory democracy. So you could see where my interests come in with cooperatives. But if you know anything about Illinois politics, you know that our governors tend to find their way behind prison bars. So it wasn't exactly something that I was looking forward to as I got more and more involved there. So after this foray into politics, I started to look for another way. I went on to search for something other than big business. I don't know how many of you recall in the 80s and 90s as Walmart was growing. There's a lot of folks that were saying, don't go to Walmart, they're killing your local businesses. Now, I was one of those guys. I was not a fan of Walmart. And I became even more so not a fan of Walmart when out of high school. I worked for them for 4 years while going to college. It was not a fun place for me to work at. But what's been interesting is the growth of Amazon along the way. This image here of Jeff Bezos swallowing up all the competition, it's true. But what I think is funny for someone like me and many folks like you who come from these communities where Walmart might have done its damage to some local businesses, there was a panel presentation which the CEO of Walmart was up there, and he's talking about the threats to the economy. And he said, one of the big threats is Amazon. They're killing mom and pop businesses all over the United States. I thought that was kind of a remarkable statement. But here's something else that I think is also remarkable. You got a guy here, Jeff Bezos, worth upwards of $150 billion. And it's been the news last year how they're going for Amazon HQ too. All these government subsidies are on the table to subsidize this guy who's worth so much money, he's got his own rocket company, right? What a remarkable system we're in right now. So 2007, I started my PhD at the University of Illinois. I was pretty lost. What is out there beside going into big business and beside going into government that I could find real meaning, real value in. What out there best exemplifies what is community development? So I stayed involved, even though I was in Champaign-Urbana, I would go back home in Mattoon often. And while I was doing some work at the Mattoon Chamber of Commerce, I got to know Chris Chrisman with the Coles-Moultrie Electric Co-op. And Chris was hearing about where I was taking my work, and he said, "Why the hell aren't you studying electric co-ops, Keith?" I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" He's like, "We're right here in your backyard. Didn't even know that we existed." I didn't know you existed, Chris. I'd never heard of the electric co-ops at this point. So over a few months, Chris would show me the scale of the sector, and it completely blew my mind. Is it popping up? There we are. So I think a lot of you have seen this image here from National Rural Electric Co-op. When I got to see the scale of the sector, it was just impressive. I got to hear about all this public entrepreneurship, how electric co-ops got involved in building other electric co-ops like G&Ts and ACES, for example. Also engaging in economic development. There's this amazing history of the electric co-ops get started in the 1930s, and they pay it forward creating other utility cooperatives, other farm cooperatives, other credit unions, housing co-ops, daycare co-ops. That's a story that I think should be getting out there. That's a story that can get us beyond a lot of political and economic impasses. But I also think that the other part of the story we're not talking about is how electric cooperatives can provide for deeper democracy through sound economics. So once this message got through to me, I was completely hooked. So my work on the electric co-op model got the attention of Nobel Prize winner Elinor Ostrom. I became a research associate at Indiana University's Ostrom Workshop in 2012. Ostrom's work is really important to the things that we all do in here. She challenges the dominant thinking amongst public policy makers about everyday people. Basically, the idea is everyday people can't take care of themselves. They can't do complex technological things. But Ostrom's work shows that where policymakers think that we need big government or big business to take care of us, she shows us that not only can everyday people self-govern, but when they have the proper institutions, they tend to do better than the big guys. That sounds a lot like cooperatives to me. Now, when I got there, one of the things that shocked me, part of the reason why I got brought into the program, she had never heard of the electric cooperatives, which I thought was remarkable. So I got a bit tired of folks talking about not knowing who you are. So I wrote this book. Come out and see me. I'll be out there signing some copies. Also, you can buy the books. I prefer you not buy on Amazon, but it's up to you. And also, if you want a copy, as we were saying, you can leave a card with Mike, right? Actually, at the registration desk. All right. So at the Ostrom Workshop, I built off of this book, and I developed a research agenda around you and other cooperatives. It got me this job that I've gotten right now with the University of California, Davis. So what the heck would make the University of California, Davis want a kid from the Rust Belt to come out and work for them? Well, California needs to address a number of issues that the Midwest and the South have already addressed. One of them, of course, is broadband. Just a couple weeks ago, we brought out one of the spokespersons from NRTC, and we spoke before a group of policymakers around the state. Their minds were blown about what you all have been doing around broadband. They had no clue. They couldn't believe that you figured out approaches for dense areas, sparse areas, mountain areas, hilly terrains, all this sort of stuff. So it looks like we're going to start getting into co-op broadband in California through this introduction. But we also need to deal with our water utilities. We have over 800 water mutuals in California, and they are underperforming. Agriculture, we have Big Ag there, we have Blue Diamond, we have Sunkist, all these sort of things. But also, we have this issue with PG&E that's occurring. So the irony here, though, is we got Silicon Valley about 80 miles away from where I'm working at. And Silicon Valley talks a lot about the sharing economy, but what they're not talking about is the original sharing economy, which is all of you, the cooperative sector. So, by the way, here's this little blip on the radar here. I just wanted to bring this up to you with PG&E. They've got a couple of little structural deficits going on. I would invite the electric cooperatives to try to get involved in that conversation in California. I think the time is ripe to consider how we can convert assets from PG&E to cooperative. So when I landed in Davis, California, I learned that we have this Energy and Efficiency Institute on the campus. There I met my colleague, the Institute's director, Ben Finkler, and I got exposed to amazing work being done there at the Energy and Efficiency Institute. When I told him about what the electric cooperatives do in their community and their impacts, Ben was surprised. He had never heard of you. Here it is, the Energy and Efficiency Institute does all this work with Edison, with PG&E, with Honda, and all these major companies, but they had not interacted with the cooperative sector. And they thought this was an amazing opportunity to get these new technologies they're working on at Davis out into the sector. So, folks, I think the message is clear. The world's not hearing about the co-op model, and we've got to get the story out. The public doesn't know you as a whole. And what happens when one bad apple emerges? What's going to safeguard our co-ops from unfair regulations that become from this one bad apple? If we can't talk to public policymakers about cooperatives, then I can't get them out into public policy. I can't get them to change laws and regulations and make laws and regulations that are going to be impactful for the cooperative sector. We're missing this major tool in the economic development toolbox. And you all know that electric cooperatives have this world-changing story to tell. I love this image here of some of the founders of an electric co-op putting up the pole, stringing up the lines. A lot of folks don't know about this origin story, that it's everyday people that came together and created one of the most complex socio-technological systems in the world. Instead, what we're doing is we're allowing big corporations to go out there and tell their story as if they're the geniuses amongst us. Everyone here in this room has been doing a lot for their communities and for this sector. In today's political world, we have a remarkable business, one that could get us through a number of these political impasses, but again, we're not telling that story. So, Rob Hochstetler, Rob, you want to raise your hand? There's Rob out there. So, Rob contacted me back in August of last year. Rob got to hear about my work, and he seems to believe in the kind of message that we're putting out there. So when he reached out to us at Davis, he's partially inspired by the recent comments from NRECA at the 2019 CEO close-up. I think this particular line that's bolded is near and dear to me and my research. We're led by consumers like you who understand and listen to the community. What that means is we have to have a governance approach that meets the needs of our local communities, our ratepayers, and delivers not just on energy, but other services along the way. So in doing this work with Rob and Central Electric Power Co-op in South Carolina, we came in with these objectives. So I want to note one thing to you. When I go out and I talk to my academic colleagues, here it was at Indiana University. I was around a bunch of folks that gravitated around Nobel laureates and this sort of thing. When I went to look at the peer-reviewed research, what has been done on electric cooperatives? First, I'll tell you this. I can find tons of articles on investor-owned models. It's limitless that's out there. I've done 3 searches over the last 5 years for electric cooperatives. There are about 15 articles on electric cooperatives in the academic world. That's pretty remarkable. So we want to contribute to that literature base. We want to get that out there so the academic community knows what's going on with electric cooperatives. But then beyond that, we also want to work in these areas of governance. That's a very important issue. How do our local cooperatives get the members at the table? How do you get the folks with the right competencies? How do you get them to understand what's going on in the energy market? Well, at the same time, they got to be chewing bubble gum. They also got to be concerned with their community. But then what about this multi-level governance thing? Not only are you trying to recruit these folks from the local level to have an impact at your local electric co-ops, they end up sending those folks to the boards at ACES, at Central. So this multi-level governance thing adds more complexity. But I'll tell you what, for an academic, this is a great area for me to be studying. And then the fourth area is how do we get our electric cooperatives to optimally impact community economic development? We know that the health of our rural communities is going to be the health of our rural electric cooperatives. So we can't sidestep that issue. We have to be concerned about economic development. So Rob and I basically wanted to show what a major research program around the governance and economic development aspects of the electric co-ops could look like. So we did this case study in South Carolina, and we asked this broader question about Central. How does Central G&T self-govern? And that might seem like a simple no-brainer question, but you'd be surprised. It's a very complex organization. All of y'all have very complex organizations. Underneath that, we asked this next question about multi-level governance. How does the consumer self-governance of Central affect its performance? It's a really important question. At the end of the day, we got to be pulling in these folks who are the local ratepayers. We got to make sure that they're competent and able to govern these things. So here's our study design. We're excited to engage in this work to look at what the electric co-ops do right and how to harness the best practices. Our approach, we're not doing this investigative journalism where we're trying to do gotcha moments. What we're actually trying to do is this appreciative inquiry. There's so many great stories of electric co-ops doing great things. And I know that some of y'all have been beaten down in the media with some of the stories that are out there. What we're wanting to do is go out and find those stories of co-op excellence and elevate that in our work. And in doing that, we want to help to develop a series of best practices. So this is how we went about the study. You'll have access to these slides so you can look into more detail around this. So our study findings, briefly, we found that the multi-level governance features of the co-op sector bake in a number of essential features. So first, there's skin in the game, right? Because you own the co-op and you can govern it, you care more about it. This means that you're going to get more involved. This explains why it is that everyday person that gets to sit on the board becomes an expert in electric utilities. It's pretty remarkable. Also, the decentralized aspect of the co-op sector allows for these wonderful economies of scale that get this mix of both decentralization and centralization. Also, when it comes to our statewide, when it comes to our G&Ts, when it comes to ACES, these serve as convening areas. We can come together and talk about our common challenges. We can learn from each other. So an isolated place in South Carolina can go out and talk to an electric co-op in Montana and get this new amazing approach on how it is we can overcome some serious challenges. Also, we can stem political crises by working together. If we're by ourselves, if we're not in the co-op family, then going out and fighting these various attacks that come from industry or policymakers is next to impossible. But with the scaffolding that you all have of coming together in this multi-level governance, it allows you to be more powerful. You have economic power and political power. Briefly, here's a word cloud. We did all these interviews, and we ran a word cloud on what folks were telling us from Central, from the member co-ops. And what really came through was this idea that the member was central. You can see right here, it's central to the word cloud. So here's where we go next with our research programming. We're going to be developing more peer-reviewed research, focusing on appreciative inquiry. Along the way, sure, we'll do some critical research, but right now, that's not our focus. We want to work with you all on getting these great stories out there and focusing on these things. I want to develop the next book. I think that there's some remarkable cooperatives that can influence where our public policy is going at the national and state levels. California has no idea you all exist. I want to get those stories out, and hopefully we can impact some of the public policy and what we're going to be doing with PG&E. We also want to put together a series of case studies, talk about how electric cooperatives are overcoming broadband, but also even other issues around rural water. Rural water has come up as a major issue. In Indiana, I know that there's one particular electric co-op that decided to become a water provider because their junior high had an E. coli problem in their drinking water. We got to put an end to that, and our electric cooperatives can be a leader in there. And then really enhance the public literacy on electric co-ops. We need to make it where people just get it. They know what an electric cooperative is, what they can do for their community, and how to engage with the sector. But also, we want to contribute back to you. Again, I'm an extension professor, so I'm not just talking to students in a classroom. I'm going out to all these communities. My commitment is to take this research and come back to you all and come back to your home communities and get this disseminated. We want to create a student-to-professional pipeline. There's this war for talent that's going on. I can tell you that there's all these students that are talking about wanting to be change agents. They want to impact their communities. If they knew about the electric co-op model, they would be excited to go work at electric cooperatives. We also want to provide executive training. We have this wonderful program with our business school around the wine industry. We want to bring that to the electric cooperatives as well. And further, we want to do professional development opportunities. So we want it where your middle-level staff can come out to UC Davis and work with us. So here's some fast facts about UC Davis. I think not a lot of folks know about us. So So we have a little bit of a problem there too, I'll admit. But we're the #1 or #2 ag school in the world. We're going back and forth with Wageningen in the Netherlands. We're the #1 vet med school. We're ranked as one of the most sustainable campuses in the world. Also, we have the Wine Institute, which, by the way, is written into our Constitution. We have beer brewing, and we have distilling. So if you come out to Davis, you'll have a good time. We'll see to that. And then here's a little bit of information about the Energy and Efficiency Institute. So as we're developing this program and we start working with you all more, these are the assets that we bring to bear. We have enormous technical resources to help out the electric cooperative sector as you're dealing with new technological changes and new policy challenges. And as you can see, we're bringing intimate knowledge about the electric co-op sector with our significant assets. We want to tell your story. We want to help you advance in co-op excellence, and we want to see more friendly co-op policies along the way. In order to do that, we do need your support. So that's something I want to talk with you all about for those of you that are interested as I'm signing books outside. So by all means, if you want to talk more about this research, if you want to see the book, come out and join me. I'll be sitting outside. Talk with me or talk to Rob back there about supporting this. There's Rob raising his hand. And thank you, Mike, and thank you, ACES, for bringing me to the family. And now I'll open up to some question and answer. So thank you.
I have a question from the back. So you said that California, there's not any co-ops out there, but there are CCAs, community choice aggregation. Can you talk about the comparison?
Yeah. So I was amazed when I got out to California, and I got to meet the handful of electric cooperatives that are out there, and I learned about these CCAs, these consumer choice aggregators. If you know anything about California public policy, they tend to stay in their own little silo. They don't talk to other states that readily. They basically came up with the idea of electric cooperatives, but their own model of it. It's really what it is. It's negotiating rates on behalf of the local residents with PG&E at the end of the day. When PG&E went bankrupt, well, they're going bankrupt, the consumer choice aggregators now are wondering what their strategy is next. Before, they're just kind of winging it. They thought, we're just going to pool our purchasing power and reduce cost. We're going to demand more out of our generators for renewable energy. But now they don't know where they're taking things. I believe there's a real opportunity in California to bring the CCAs in some way into the co-op community. Whether it's being a member of ACES, for example, for wholesale power, or being a member of some of the purchasing cooperatives that are out there. So right now, I'd say the CCAs, we don't really know where they're going with things, but I think that's an opportunity to grow the co-op family. I think I saw a hand over here.
And the traditional G&T model resource mix, like, do you think that's going to be a challenge to incorporate them in the future into a co-op type model?
I don't think that it'd be a challenge. I think that it's a real opportunity. Up to this point, in fact, 2 weeks ago, we had a board meeting and a number of the CCAs showed up. They weren't even aware of the generation transmission co-op model. So when I told them that there's this approach to pooling your purchasing power for wholesale energy, they were surprised. And they said they want to be exposed to what's going on in the electric cooperative sector to see if it's an opportunity for them. So it really is a remarkable thing, because me coming from the Midwest, I went out to California thinking, oh, of course these folks are going to be well advanced. You know, it's always in the media that California is leading on all these things. But I'll tell you what, the electric cooperatives are far ahead of what's going on in California energy policy in many ways. So I think there's a ton of opportunities to bring some of those electric co-op innovations out to California. Any other thoughts, questions? All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody.